The proposition. Dominic Reed drummed his fingers on the mahogany desk, the steady rhythm matching his heartbeat as he processed what his father's attorney had just told him. 6 months, Mr. Walters? That's all I have left? Jerome Walters adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. I'm afraid so. Your grandfather's will is quite specific. You must be married by your 30th birthday to receive the inheritance. The family business, the estate in Connecticut, the financial assets, all of it. He slid the paperwork across the desk. Dominic ran a hand through his dark hair. This is absurd. What kind of archaic condition is this? Your grandfather was... traditional. He believed marriage was a stabilizing force. Well, it didn't work so well for my parents, did it? Dominic's voice was bitter. The memory of their vicious divorce still stung, even 15 years later. I understand your reluctance, but we're talking about a substantial inheritance. Perhaps. You could consider a temporary arrangement? Dominic's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? Mr. Walters cleared his throat. Many clients in similar situations have found creative solutions. A marriage of convenience, just long enough to satisfy the terms. You mean find someone willing to fake it? Dominic laughed humorlessly. That's ridiculous. But 3 weeks later, after reviewing the extensive inheritance that would otherwise go to his estranged uncle, Dominic found himself sitting in a quiet catha, waiting for the woman his assistant Prisha had suggested might be interested in such an arrangement. The bell above the door jingled, and a woman with copper-colored hair stepped inside, scanning the room. She wore a simple navy blazer over a white blouse, practical yet elegant. Her gaze landed on him, and something in her expression, a mixture of determination and wariness, told him this was Naomi Foster. She approached with measured steps. Mr. Read Dominic, please. He stood, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Naomi. She sat down, back straight, hands folded on the table. Prisha mentioned you had a business proposition. Dominic studied her. There was something refreshing about her directness. Did she explain the nature of it? Only that it involves a temporary marriage and compensation? Naomi's green eyes held his. I'd like to hear the details from you. Dominic outlined his situation. Inheritance, the deadline, the terms. As he spoke, he noticed how carefully she listened, occasionally nodding but otherwise giving nothing away. Why would you consider this? He asked when he'd finished. Something flickered across her face, vulnerability quickly masked. My father was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. The care facility costs are... significant. My salary as a children's book illustrator doesn't cover it. I see. Dominic leaned forward. If we did this, I would cover all expenses related to your father's care. For how long? The will requires we remain married for 1 year. After that, a quiet divorce, and you'd receive a settlement that would secure your father's care for years to come. Naomi took a sip of her tea, considering. What would this marriage look like, day to day? We'd need to live together to maintain appearances. I have a penthouse with plenty of space, separate bedrooms, of course. We'd attend necessary social functions together, present a convincing front. He paused. Beyond that, we each live our lives. No romantic entanglements. Absolutely not, Dominic said firmly. I have no interest in actual marriage. My last relationship ended... badly. Neither do I. Her voice was equally resolute. What about family? Friends, we tell them. The minimum necessary. Whirlwind romance. My family will be suspicious, but they won't challenge it openly. Naomi tapped her fingernail against her cup, thinking, the deadline is in just over 4 months. We'd need to move quickly. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the autumn leaves swirled in the wind, a kaleidoscope of oranges and reds against the gray city backdrop. Finally, Naomi met his gaze. I'll need everything in writing. Terms, timeline, financial arrangements, of course. My lawyer can draft something. I'll have my own lawyer review it. She extended her hand across the table. Pending that review, Mr. Reed, I believe you've found yourself a wife. Dominic shook her hand, noting how cool and steady it felt in his. Thank you, Miss Foster. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Dominic watched her walk away, wondering what he'd just set in motion. 1 year, he reminded himself. 1 year of pretending, and then they could both return to their real lives. Terms and conditions: the courthouse wedding was as clinical as a business merger. Naomi wore a simple cream-colored dress, Dominic a charcoal suit. Their only witnesses were Jerome Walters and Prisha, who tossed a handful of rice as they touch of ceremony that felt oddly jarring against the sterility of their arrangement. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Reed," Jerome said, handing them the marriage certificate. "I'll submit this to the executor immediately." Dominic nodded, carefully not looking at the woman beside him, who was now legally his wife. "Excellent. And the funds for Mr. Foster's care be transferred by end of day," Jerome confirmed. Naomi's shoulders relaxed slightly, the first genuine emotion Dominic had seen from her since they'd signed the contract 3 days earlier. The drive to his penthouse was quiet. Dominic glanced occasionally at Naomi, who watched the city pass by through the car window, her expression contemplative. "Your things arrived this morning," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Prisha had them placed in your room." "Thank you," Naomi turned to him. "I appreciate the efficiency." When they arrived at the building, the doorman greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome home, Mr. Reed. And Mrs. Reed, welcome to the Archer. I'm Thomas." "Thank you, Thomas." Naomi smiled politely, slipping seamlessly into her role. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was silent. Dominic used his keycard, and the doors opened directly into the penthouse. Naomi's carefully neutral expression faltered as she took in the sprawling space floor, 2 ceiling windows framing the Manhattan skyline, minimalist furniture in shades of gray and blue, abstract art on the walls. "This is ... impressive. It's just a place." Dominic shrugged, setting down his keys. "Let me show you around." He gave her the tour: kitchen, living room, his office, the guest rooms converted to a studio space for her illustration work, and finally, their separate bedrooms at opposite ends of the hallway. "I've prepared this for you," he said, opening the door to a spacious room with a view of the park. The walls were a soft sage green, the bedding cream and gold. "If you'd prefer different colors or furniture, just let me know."
Naomi, step.
Inside, touching the edge of the writing desk by the window. "This is more than adequate, thank you." "The bathroom is through there. I've cleared half the closet space." She nodded, then turned to face him fully. "Now that we're here, I think we should establish some ground rules." "Agreed." Dominic leaned against the doorframe. "What did you have in mind?" "Privacy is important to me. This is your home, but I need some space that's truly mine, of course. This room and the studio are your domains entirely. I won't enter without permission." "Thank you." She hesitated. "About daily routines, I typically work from early morning until late afternoon. I'm quiet, but I do listen to music sometimes. It won't be a problem. I'm at the office most days, and when I work from home, it's in my study." They continued negotiating the minutiae of cohabitation: meal schedules, mostly separate. Chorzy had a service, but she insisted on handling her own spaces. Social appearances minimal, but necessary. And the all-important rule: no romantic entanglements under this roof. "If either of us ... meet someone," Dominic said carefully, "discretion would be appreciated." "Agreed. Though I'm not looking for that kind of complication right now, neither am I." They sealed their domestic contract with a handshake. As businesslike as everything else about their arrangement, the first few weeks passed in a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. They moved around each other like planets in distant orbits, occasionally sharing space, but rarely colliding. Breakfasts were staggered, dinners separate affairs. Dominic learned that Naomi was an early riser who made herbal tea instead of coffee. She discovered he worked late into the night and preferred classical music when he thought. No one was listening. Their first test came 3 weeks into the marriage, a charity gala hosted by Dominic's family business. "You don't have to go," Dominic said, adjusting his bow tie in the hallway mirror. "I can make excuses." "No," we agreed. "Public appearances are part of the deal." Naomi emerged from her room in an emerald green gown that made her copper hair glow like fire. Besides, your family should meet your new wife, shouldn't they? Dominic stared, momentarily forgetting their arrangement. She was beautiful, not in the polished, artificial way of the women he usually escorted to these functions, but in a way that seemed to radiate from within. Naomi misread his silence. Is something wrong? Is this not appropriate? No, I mean, yes, it's perfect. You look... too. He cleared his throat. You'll make a convincing wife. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. That's the idea, isn't it? At the gala, Naomi surprised. Him. She charmed his business associates, deflected prying questions about their whirlwind romance with practiced ease, and even managed to impress his perpetually unimpressible stepmother, Eleanor. She's expected, Eleanor murmured to Dominic, as they watched Naomi discussing art with one of the museum's curators. Not your usual type. That's why I married her, Dominic replied, the half-truth coming easily. Later, as they danced a necessary performance for the watching, Dominic found himself studying the woman in his arms. You're good at this, he said quietly. Dancing, at pretending, at making people believe this is real. Something flickered in her eyes. I illustrated a children's book once about a little girl who pretended to be a queen. The author wrote that the best pretending comes from finding a small piece of truth to build upon. And what truth are you building on tonight? Naomi looked up at him, her expression unreadable. That this arrangement benefits us both, and for tonight, that's enough. As the weeks turned into months, their carefully constructed boundaries began to show hairline cracks. Naomi started leaving a cup of coffee outside his study door on nights he worked late. Dominic found himself bringing home pastries from the bakery she'd mentioned liking. Small, seemingly insignificant gestures that neither of them acknowledged. Then came the night of the storm 3 months into their marriage. Thunder rattled the windows, and the power went out across the neighborhood. Dominic found Naomi in the kitchen, illuminated by candles she'd placed around the space. I was just about to bring you some light, she said, holding up an extra candle. I'm fine. You okay? I know storms can be unnerving this high up. Actually, I love storms. She smiled, and in the candlelight, it reached her eyes. They remind me that there are still things in the world powerful enough to disrupt our carefully ordered lives. Dominic found himself smiling back. That's an unusual perspective. Would you like some wine, since we're both here and the power's out anyway? He hesitated, then nodded. Why not? That night, sitting on the floor of the living room, backs against the sofa, they shared a bottle of Cabernet and, for the first time, genuine conversation. Naomi told him about growing up with a father who built elaborate stories for her, who'd inspired her love of illustration. Dominic spoke of the weight of family expectations, of wanting more than just the business his grandfather had built. When the lights finally flickered back on at 2 a.m, they both blinked, as if waking from a shared dream. I should get to bed, Naomi said, gathering the wine glasses. Yes, of course. Dominic stood, suddenly awkward in a way he hadn't been all night. Thank you for the company. She paused at the edge of the hallway. Dominic, it was nice getting to know the person I'm pretending to be married to. After she left, Dominic remained in the living room, staring out at the city lights, wondering why their arrangement suddenly felt more complicated than when they'd started. Cracks in the foundation by the 4th month of their marriage, the lines between pretense and reality had begun to blur. It started with small things. Dominic lingering over breakfast to hear about Naomi's latest illustration project. Naomi waiting up when he had late meetings, a cup of tea ready when he walked through the door. They still maintained separate lives, separate spaces. But the carefully constructed wall between them had developed doorways they both found themselves using with increasing frequency. The first significant shift came when Dominic received a call about his largest client threatening to pull their business. He paced the living room, phone pressed to his ear as Naomi worked quietly at the dining table. With all due respect, Richard, we've delivered exactly what your team requested, he said, frustration evident in his voice. The specifications. Haven't changed since our last meeting?" After he hung up, he sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. "Bad news?" Naomi asked softly. Dominic looked up, having almost forgotten she was there. "Peterson and Sons is threatening to walk. They're claiming our designs don't match their vision, but they keep changing what that vision is." "Can I see?" He blinked. "See what?" "The designs they're unhappy with." "I might not know business, but I do understand visual communication." Dominic hesitated, then retrieved his laptop. Naomi moved to sit beside him, the closest they'd been since that night during the power outage. She studied the presentation with a critical eye. "The problem isn't the content," she said finally. "It's the story it's telling. See here?" She pointed to the sequence of slides. "There's no emotional connection. It's all data and logistics." For the next 2 hours, they reworked the presentation together. Naomi's artistic eye transformed the sterile business proposal into a compelling narrative. When they finished, Dominic stared at her, seeing her for perhaps the first time. "You're brilliant," he said. A flush crept up her neck. "I just know how to make people feel something when they look at an image." The next day, when Peterson and Sons signed the contract, Dominic brought home champagne and takeout from the Thai restaurant Naomi had mentioned wanting to try. 2 successful partnerships, he toasted. Their glasses clinking in the kitchen they now shared more comfortably. "Professional partnerships," Naomi clarified, though her smile was warm. Of course, Dominic agreed, even as something shifted in his chest, a feeling he wasn't ready to name. The following weekend, Dominic found himself at the door of Naomi's studio, something he'd never done before. Knocked hesitantly. "Come in," she called. He entered to find her surrounded by sketches, hair tied back in a messy knot, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced around her like tiny stars. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "I just wanted to let you know I'm heading out to visit my father's grave. It's the anniversary of his death." Naomi set down her pencil. "Would you like company?" The question caught him off guard. "It's not part of our arrangement." "I know." Her eyes were gentle. "But no one should have to do hard things alone." That afternoon, as they stood before his father's grave, Dominic felt a strange sense of peace having her beside him. He told Naomi things he'd never told anyone about his complicated relationship with his father, about the man's final days, about the regrets that still haunted him. On the drive home, she reached across the center console and briefly squeezed his hand just once. Just enough. That night, Dominic lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when this woman had started to matter to him in ways that went far beyond their contract. The true test of their evolving relationship came unexpectedly. Naomi received a call from her father's care facility. He'd had a bad day. One of his increasingly frequent episodes of confusion and distress. Dominic found her in the hallway, struggling into her coat, eyes bright with unshed tears. "What's happened? It's Dad," she said, voice breaking. "He's asking for me. He doesn't recognize anyone, and he's upset." "I'll drive you," Dominic said immediately. "You don't have to. I want to." At the facility, Dominic waited in the hallway while Naomi sat with her father. Through the partially open door, he could see her holding the older man's hand, speaking softly to him until his agitation eased. The tenderness in her face made something ache inside Dominic's chest. When they returned home late that night, Naomi was quiet, withdrawn. Dominic made her tea and sat with her on the sofa. "He used to be so strong," she said finally. "He built furniture with his hands. Beautiful pieces that would last for generations. We can't remember how to use a fork sometimes." "Tell me about him," Dominic said. "Tell me what he was like before." Naomi looked surprised, then grateful. Her childhood, of her father's workshop, of the man who'd raised her after her mother died. Dominic listened, asked questions, and somewhere in the sharing, her grief became something they both carried. When she finally fell asleep, head resting against his shoulder, Dominic didn't move her to her room. Instead, he carefully adjusted their position, covered them both with a throw blanket, and let himself hold her through the night. In the morning, neither of them mentioned it, but something fundamental had changed. Their careful orbit had shifted, drawing them inexorably closer, into a new configuration neither had anticipated. Asterisk. Walls coming down by the 6th month of their marriage. Dominic and Naomi had established a new normal one that bore little resemblance to the sterile arrangement they'd originally agreed upon. They still maintained separate bedrooms, still honored the letter of their contract, but the spirit of it had evolved into something neither had anticipated. They ate dinner together most nights, sharing stories from their days. Weekends often found them exploring the city together, museums. For Naomi, historical architecture tours for Dominic. They discovered shared interests in obscure documentaries and crossword puzzles, which they now completed together over Sunday morning coffee. It was domestic, comfortable, dangerous. Prisha was the first to comment on the change. Cornering Dominic in his office one afternoon, so she said, perching on the edge of his desk. "Are we still pretending this is just a business arrangement?" Dominic frowned. "What are you talking about, you and Naomi? The way you look at her when you think no. One's watching. The fact that you've mentioned her in every conversation we've had for the past month. She's my wife," he said automatically, the words feeling strangely right on his tongue. "Yes, but she wasn't supposed to be, was she? Not really." Dominic turned to the window, watching the city below. "It's complicated. Actually, it's remarkably simple. You're falling in love with her. That wasn't part of the plan." Prisha laughed softly. "The heart doesn't care much for business plans, Dominic." That evening, as he rode the elevator up to the penthouse, Dominic found himself anticipating seeing Naomi with an intensity that confirmed Prisha's observation. This had gone far beyond convenience or friendship. The penthouse was unusually quiet when he entered. Naomi. He found her in her studio, staring at an envelope on her desk. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned by her expression. She looked up, eyes troubled. "I got an offer. A publishing house in London wants me to illustrate a series of children's books. It's the opportunity I've been working toward for years." "That's wonderful," Dominic said, ignoring the sudden hollowness in his chest. "When would you start?" "That's the thing. They want me there next month for initial meetings, and the project would last at least a year." The implications hung in the air between them. Their contract had 6 more months, okay? After that, they'd agreed to part ways, a clean break, no complications. "You should take it," Dominic said finally. "We can figure out the logistics. Maybe you could go for the meetings and come back until our year is up." Naomi studied his face. "Is that what you want?" The question caught him off guard. What did he want? Not this arrangement, not anymore. But he had no right to ask for more, to stand in the way of her dreams. "I want what's best for you," he said carefully. Something like disappointment flickered across her face. "I see." The following week was tense, filled with conversations that stopped abruptly when one of them entered a room. With careful politeness that felt worse than argument, they were retreating to their original positions, rebuilding. Walls that had slowly crumbled over months, the catalyst came unexpectedly. Dominic's uncle Victor, the one who would have inherited if Dominic hadn't married, showed up unannounced at the penthouse one evening while Dominic was working late. Naomi answered the door to find a man with Dominic's jaw, but none of his warmth, reeking of expensive scotch. "So you're the gold digger who snatched my inheritance," Victor slurred, pushing past her into the apartment. "You must be Uncle Victor," Naomi said coolly. "Dominic isn't home." "I know. I wanted to meet you myself. See, it was worth $15 million. He circled her predatorily. "You're pretty enough, I suppose, but Dominic never cared much for pretty things. Makes me wonder what your other qualities might be." "I think you should leave," Naomi said, reaching for her phone. Victor grabbed her wrist. "Not until you tell me the truth. What's your angle? What did you do to convince my nephew to marry you after swearing he'd never marry anyone?" "Let go of me," Naomi said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "Was it just the money? Or did you figure out what makes him tick?" Victor's grip tightened. "Maybe you discovered what broke him after that fiasco with Jennifer." The door opened, and Dominic stood frozen for a moment, taking in the scene, Victor gripping Naomi's wrist, her face pale but defiant. "Get your hands off my wife." Dominic's voice was deadly quiet as he crossed the room in 3 strides. "Victor?" released Naomi, turning to face his nephew with a sneering smile. "There he is, the happily married man. Nee, does she know about Jennifer? About why you're really doing this? Get out." Dominic stepped between them. "Now, she deserves to know what she's gotten herself into," Victor persisted. "How you found yourself a convenient bride just in time to secure grandfather's money. It's all just another business transaction for you." Dominic's fist connected with Victor's jaw, sending the older man staggering backward. "That's my wife you're talking about," Dominic said, voice shaking with rage. "And unlike you, she has integrity, compassion, and worth beyond anything you could understand. Now get out of our home before I throw you out." After Victor had been escorted from the building by security, Dominic found Naomi in the kitchen, holding an ice pack to her wrist. "Are you okay?" he asked, gently taking her arm to examine it. "I'm fine. He was just drunk and trying to intimidate me." She looked up at him. "Who's Jennifer?" Dominic sighed, leaning against the counter. "My ex-fiancée. We were engaged 3 years ago. She was ... everything I thought I wanted. Sophisticated, connected, ambitious. What happened? I overheard her on the phone with her friend, laughing about how she'd finally landed a read. How once we were married, she could finally quit pretending to care about his boring company and start enjoying my family's money." He smiled bitterly. "Turns out our relationship was a business transaction too. Just one where I didn't know the terms." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you were so insistent on our arrangement being strictly business? No emotions? No complications? I thought it would be safer that way." He met her eyes. "Wrong. What do you mean?" Dominic took a deep breath. "I mean that somewhere between our contract signing and this moment, this stopped being just business for me. And the thought of you leaving for London is tearing me apart, even though I have no right to ask you to stay." Naomi set down the ice pack, her eyes never leaving his. "What if you did ask? Would you consider staying? Not because of our contract, but because of whatever this is becoming." "What is it becoming, Dominic?" she pressed, taking a step closer. To him, he reached out, gently tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear. "Something real. It's something I never expected to find, especially not like this." "I turned down the London offer yesterday," Naomi confessed. "Couldn't imagine being that far from my father. From you?" Relief flooded through him. "You're staying." "I'm staying. But we need to be honest about what this is now, about what we want going forward." Dominic took her hands in his. "I want this to be real. No more pretending, no more separate. Livs, I want to fall asleep beside you and wake up with you. I want to build something that lasts beyond contracts and conditions." "That sounds suspiciously like a real marriage," Naomi said, a smile playing at her lips. "Maybe it does." He drew her closer. "Would that be so terrible?" Instead of answering, Naomi rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. There first. Kiss, sweet and certain, and nothing at all like pretending. Rewriting the contract 1 year to the day after their courthouse wedding, Dominic and Naomi stood in the same room before the same judge. But this time, everything was different. "You understand that by signing these papers, your marriage will be legally dissolved," the judge said, peering at them over her glasses. Dominic looked at Naomi, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Actually, Your Honor," Dominic said, "we've had a change of plans." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Oh, we'd like to withdraw our petition for divorce," Naomi explained. "And instead, we'd like to renew our vows." Jerome Walters, standing nearby, dropped his pen in shock. Prisha, their faithful witness once again, merely smiled knowingly. As they left the courthouse hand in hand, Jerome hurried after them. "What about the inheritance? It's secure now you've fulfilled the terms. You don't need to stay married." Dominic looked at Naomi, at the copper-haired woman who had entered his life as a business partner and somehow become the center of his world. "Some things are worth more than inheritance, Jerome." The lawyer stared at them, bewildered. But the contract has been renegotiated, Naomi said, squeezing Dominic's hand. Back at the penthouse, their home now, truly shared, they celebrated. With the same bottle of champagne they'd opened a year ago when they'd signed their original contract. To new beginnings, Dominic toasted, and unexpected endings, Naomi added with a smile. They'd spent the last 6 months of their arrangement gradually dismantling the walls between them. The separate bedrooms had been abandoned after that night of Victor's intrusion, when neither had wanted to be alone. Their lives had intertwined more with each passing day, Naomi helping Dominic reimagine his company's creative direction. Dominic supporting her as she launched a children's book of her own creation, and through it all, they'd fallen in love slowly. Then all at once, in the quiet moments between morning coffee and goodnight kisses. "When did you know?" Naomi asked, curled against him on the sofa where they'd spent so many evenings. "When did you realize this had become real?" Dominic considered. "I think part of me knew that night of the storm, when we talked until dawn, but I couldn't admit it to myself until the day I took you to my father's grave. No one had ever seen me that vulnerable before, and instead of using it against me, you just held space for it." He kissed her temple. "What about you?" "The day you came with me to see my father," she said softly. "You sat in that sterile hallway for hours, just so I wouldn't have to drive home alone if I was upset. No one in my life had ever put me first like that." They were interrupted by the doorbell. Opening it, they found Eleanor Monic's once frosty stepmother, who had, over the past year, become surprisingly fond of Naomi. "I heard the news," she said, stepping inside with an elegant gift bag, "that you're staying married." "Word travels fast," Dominic commented dryly. "Jerome called me in a state of confusion." Eleanor handed Naomi the bag. "I thought this might be appropriate for the occasion." Inside was a vintage bottle of champagne and a small velvet box. Naomi opened it to find a pair of antique diamond and emerald earrings. "They were your grandfather's first gift to your grandmother," Eleanor explained to Dominic. "He would have wanted them to go to the woman who finally captured his grandson's heart, Evan, if it didn't happen in the order he expected." After Eleanor left, Dominic turned to Naomi, taking her hands in his. "I have something for you, too. A more appropriate ring than the one we chose in haste last year." He produced a small box of his own, opening it to reveal a platinum band set, with an emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds, perfect match to Eleanor's earrings, though he couldn't have known. "I had it designed to match your eyes," he said. "If you'd prefer something else, it's perfect," Naomi interrupted, tears brimming. "But you don't need to. I want to. I want to do everything properly this time." He took the ring from its box. "Naomi Foster Reed, will you stay married to me? Not for convenience or inheritance or any practical reason, but because I love you more than I ever thought possible." Naomi laughed through her tears. "That's the most backward proposal I've ever heard. Is that a yes?" She held out her hand, allowing him to slide the ring onto her finger, beside the simple band they'd chosen a year ago. "It's a yes. Today and every day." Later that evening, as they prepared for a small dinner with friends to celebrate their decision, Dominic found Naomi in her studio, which had gradually migrated to a sunny corner of their shared bedroom. She was putting the finishing touches on an illustration.
It's this,
he asked, looking over her shoulder. The drawing showed 2 paper dolls, hand in hand, gradually transforming into real people with color and dimension and life. "It's us," she said simply, "for the children's book I'm working on. About how sometimes the stories we think we're telling turn out to be different from the ones we're actually living." "What's it called?" Naomi smiled up at him. "Paper Hearts, Real Love. A story about 2 people who pretended so well they forgot they were pretending." Dominic leaned down to kiss her, marveling at how this woman, originally just a name on a contract, had become the author of his happiness, the illustrator of his future. "I love it," he said, "almost as much as I love you." Outside their window, the city continued its relentless pace, but inside, time seemed to stretch and slow. They had started with 12 months of pretending, but now they had a lifetime of reality ahead, with all its complications and joys and unexpected turns, and neither of them would have it any other way.